Welcome to the Regional Studies plenary session. Today we have what I think promises to be a very exciting, memorable, and maybe even sort of historic merging of two fields. We have a sort of pretty packed agenda. We have four of the titans of these fields here to speak to us. And what we're going to be talking about is two sets of theory. The first one, evolutionary economic geography. If I can put it, a more sort of European body of theory based on relatedness, endogenous regional activity, something which Ron Boschma is going to be talking about in a moment. And another sort of body of theory, a body of work, global production networks, maybe more inspired by the fast-growing Asian countries than Europe, more about exogenous coupling, and also one which is maybe, if I can say, associated with more radical growth in recent times. So we've got these two interesting bodies of theory, which, for those of us who've been in this field for a while, such as me, we know that these are hugely important. But then we've also seen a series of shocks. We've seen, obviously, the COVID pandemic, geopolitical tensions. We've seen a move towards maybe reshoring and a move towards different new forms of policy, particularly in the United States around the CHIPS Act and IRA. And because of that, now is a really good time to be reevaluating these theories, looking at whether they are still sort of fit for purpose. And in particular, and the focus on today, I think, is going to be on seeing what they can learn from each other and also trying to sort of cross-fertilize some sort of insights from the two of them. So as I say, we have four fantastic speakers today. We're going to start off with Ron Boschma from the University of Utrecht, then Henry Yeung from the National University of Singapore. Then we're going to have responses from Jessie Poon, University of Buffalo, and Lisa de Propris, who's joining us online from the University of Birmingham. I think it's going to be a really exciting event. I hope you do too. So we'll kick off with Ron. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Very happy to be here. And thanks to Jessie, thanks to Neil, and thanks to the RCA that we have this opportunity to explore, let's say, links between evolution, economic geography, and the global value chain literature. The latter literature I'm not that familiar with, so anyone that can help me out in improving my knowledge about the global value chain, very welcome. But I have something to say on to what extent the two might be linked, and what kind of future research avenue we can explore. Kind of debate, at least for myself, started when Henry was publishing a paper that was the annual lecture of regional studies in what was it, in 2020 or even 2019, published in 2021, in which he was actually asking himself, okay, what can both fields mean to each other? And then I was invited to write a response that was published in Area Development and Policy. And there we had some, I would say, some friendly encounters just to explore, okay, what both fields could mean to each other. Henry started with a kind of sympathetic critique on evolution economic geography, especially that part of evolution economic geography that is focusing on regional diversification. And actually, he was making a very good points, a good critique. One of them was that there might be too much focus on regional capabilities when explaining regional diversification, and that went at the expense of a lack of studies on interregional linkages. Then prime focus on firms and less so on non-firm actors. And for sure, evolution economic geography has mostly focused on the global north and not so much on the global south. So, and then Henry developed an argument in which he said, okay, we need to link the global production network concept of strategic coupling, and to link that to the regional diversification literature, and to see to what extent we can link both fields. Then so inspired by his talk, by his paper, I was thinking about, okay, let's go into the global value chain literature and see to what extent there are already things going on, which might be, which you can actually refer to evolution in economic geography principles. And I found at least two. First of all, the work of Danny McKinnon. I know he's here, but I'm not sure whether he's in the room. actually trying to make the whole global production network concept more dynamic, in the sense that he explored the dynamic interplay between strategic needs of lead firms in global production networks on the one hand, and regional assets on the other hand, with regional institutions as key players, right, in that respect. And there were processes of coupling, decoupling, and recoupling. And that, I think, was a very interesting way of looking at it, making it more dynamic, building on the evolutionary concept like past creation, past dependency, etc. So that was, I think, a very good effort to link the two. And then there was a big literature already happening in the, well, 2 decades ago, looking at clusters and upgrading of clusters, and to what extent clusters are linked to global value chains, and to what extent that might enable upgrading processes in clusters. There are classic studies on that by Humphrey and Smits, of course, published in 2002, but also Elisa Giuliani, Andrea Morson, Pietro Belli, Rabelotti. They have all done excellent work on that, taking this global value chain perspective, but referring to evolutionary concept like innovation systems, that learning is very important, a sort of capacity of firms are crucial in order to benefit from linkages, interregional linkages, international linkages within global value chains. So there was, to me, when I explored that type of literature, I actually said, well, there's already a lot of things going on, right? That actually take on evolution concepts and try to apply that to global value chain literature. Okay, but there are also some, let's say, unexplored territories in both literatures, which I think are fruitful to explore. One of that, and Henry was one of the first to admit that also, is that there was not much literature yet on the formation of global production networks. So how do they emerge? Where do they emerge? And how is this emergence process taking shape? Second one is there was not so much work in the global production networks linking network dynamics with the concept of uneven development. So global production network did not really bring on board too much network tools and network theory in order to explore to what extent lead firms actually can mean something to the regions they're connected to, and to what extent that might have an effect on uneven development in countries and regions. Another point which I think is still a bit unexplored in that literature, where we can really mean something in the near future, is that the relative importance of global production networks and global value chains for regional diversification and uneven development, because it is just one of the mechanisms through which uneven development is actually being shaped. So the migration, of course, is an important mechanism, things like that. So did we ever did a study in which we try to assess the relative importance of those type of processes in which international and interregional linkages actually are being shaped? And that's where my main contribution will be in this particular lecture, is to explore a fourth topic in which we can actually try to explore the potential of using evolutionary concept to the global value chain literature, is to take global value chains literature as a unit of analysis in evolutionary economic geography, and that has not yet been done too much. And to embed it in the type of relatedness complexity framework that many evolutionary economic geography papers are actually applying. Well, then the big question is how to do that. So how to connect global value chains to study regional diversification from a relatedness complexity framework. So just say a few words on the regional diversification literature right there. There have been many papers out there, and many of people here in the room have contributed to that, to say, okay, the focus is on new economic activities, and where do they emerge, and to what extent do they build and exploit on capabilities that are present in the region. And those activities might be many things. There might be industries, there might be products, there might be technologies, there might be occupations, there might be designs, there might be trademarks. All of those topics have already been investigated and to what extent actually you need existing capabilities to move into new trademarks or new designs or new industries or new technologies. There's very strong evidence for that, and refer to that as the principle of relatedness. But we didn't take into account tasks or functions within global value chains and apply the same type of relatedness complexity framework. And let's see what we can mean here. So one potential way to go forward is to apply this framework to explain the ability of a region to develop new and more complex value chains, and also upgrade existing value chains as a result of relatedness with existing value chains in regions. So do capabilities that are present in value chains allow you to move into new value chains or upgrade your existing value chains? And that is the empirical question. If we could do that, then I think we have already a perfect integration of evolution economic geography, or at least a quite essential part of evolution economic geography and the field of global value chain. Well, let's see. So a bit about the relatedness concept. I don't go into detail here. Actually, what it is saying is that you need local capabilities to move into something new. They condition which activities are feasible to develop in regions, so they provide opportunities, but they set also limits to what can be achieved in this diversification process. So you cannot just diversify into anything. You might have more opportunities in some activities on which you can build on related capabilities in the region. So the more related an activity is to an existing activity in the region, the lower the cost to develop this activity. You really can already build and use the existing capabilities present in the region. Second concept is economic complexity. Well, it's a huge literature introduced by Hidalgo and Hausman in 2009. Actually, what you can have long debates about what it is, and even longer debates about how it is being measured. But actually, what it is saying is that complex activities are considered to be unique, and they rely on a wide range of capabilities. So, and artificial intelligence is very complex. Why? Because it is very hard to master those capabilities in order to excel in artificial intelligence. And you need to combine and coordinate many different capabilities in order to develop new technologies in artificial intelligence. So that's why they are very complex. So so if you take relatedness and complexity together, is that you not only want to diversify into global value chains that are related to the capabilities that you already have, but you also want to move into more complex global value chain, because that means upgrading process in your local economy. And this is how we are going to analyze it. So you can then have a nice matrix. Now that the point is working. Yes, but it is very slow, as you. Well, anyway, it's only a 2x2 matrix, not that complicated. So on the x-axis relatedness, on the y-axis complexity. So here, this is an opportunity space for a region. So you can map all global value chains and all functions within the global value chains in this relatedness complexity map. And they score high or low on relatedness. So if you score high, you have many relevant capabilities to move into a new global value chain or upgrade existing value chains in the region. And if it makes your economy even more complex, even better. So that is the right up product there, right? Low risk, high benefit. So you can build relevant capabilities, and it would make your economy more complex if you succeed to move into those. But in reality, not many regions have those opportunities, have those opportunity sets. So some regions only have them in low risk, low benefit. So they have relevant capabilities, but they really cannot move into the very complex global value chain. High risk, high benefits, that's always an interesting example. So you don't really rely too much on relevant capabilities present in the region. But if you succeed to move into a very high complex global value chain, it can really make a difference. Am I good? So, okay, so this is theory, this is framework. Here I just mapped it for industries. This is still the France region, Paris region, one of the super rich region in France. And here you have relatedness complexity, and you can actually see there's a positive relationship between relatedness and complexity. So Ile-de-France is super rich, because it has many opportunities to move into the most complex industries. Right? So, and it has no opportunities to move in the least complex industries, but why would Ile-de-France care? Right? So, because it does not really bring too much economic benefits to the region. Silesia, Polish region, old coal mining region, steel region, old industrial regions, many old industrial regions struggle. And this is basically at least part of the story why they struggle. Negative relationship between latency and complexity. So they have potentials, but in very low complex industries. Right? Well, they have, in the right up quadrant, they have no opportunities whatsoever. So they cannot really move in the most complex industries because they don't have the capabilities to do so. And that is just a reflection of the industrial past they have gone through. Now, go to a global value chain. How can we apply this to global value chain? Now, first of all, we have to find an indicator, which is built just on the global value chain literature, which is actually taking on board two things. There are different industries may share similar tasks or functions, right? Like electronics might be quite similar to textiles when it concerns production. So it might be the case that you can really move from electronics to textiles as far as assembly activities are concerned. And the second is the same industry might also perform very different tasks or functions in different regions, like R&D and production in electronics. So being specialized in electronics in the US might be a very different animal than being specialized in electronics in Namibia or whatever. Right? So, oh yeah. So you can use this framework, and you can say, well, then I take region industry functions as my unit of analysis, and then the dependent value will become, I can move into new value chains depending on related products. So I can move from mobile phones to laptops, as long as those are related to each other, they share similar capabilities, which would mean horizontal upgrading in the global value chain terminology. You can move into new functions, right? So in existing value chains, depending on related functions. So you might move from production in laptops to R&D in laptops if they are related to each other, if there are some similar capabilities in both types of functions. Or you can go to a new industry function based on related industry functions. You can maybe go from management of mobile phones to marketing of laptops, because they require similar capabilities, right? So that is what you're trying to capture in this diversification process, taking a global value chain perspective. Oh, the smiling curve. So what we do is we get rid of the smiling curve because the value additive functions are pre-ranked there, right? So production is always considered as having the lowest value added. The other functions are, we take the complexity indicator. So we're going to measure of all industry functions, we're going to measure the complexity of each industry function. So that allows us to do many things. We can identify relatedness between industry functions. So then we can actually compare any industry functions in terms of shared capabilities and the levels of complexity. So in a way, I can compare managements in laptops with productions in textiles. Do they have the same level of complexity? Do they have the same level of relatedness? And then I can really make some nice networks in which each dot stands for a particular industry of occupation. This is a paper that we are working on using regional input-output linkages in European regions. Those data have just become available. And you can actually see that some industry functions are related to each other, others are not. So it's really a network. You can actually see that, of course, when you go to the regional scale, to the subnational scale, the data are not very good, not of very high quality, because you don't have many industries. You don't have very detailed occupations, etc. But this is as far as we can go right now. But it's just to show that this type of framework can actually be used. So what we could do, so we can compare industry functions in terms of shared capabilities and level of complexity. To me, that's already a very nice property. of using this relatedness complexity framework. But you can also determine positions of regions in this industry function space. What is it? What is their opportunity set? Where can they move into? What type of industry functions are available to them? Where they can move to and which one they cannot. So going back to my network, but the pointer is not working. Oh, sorry. That's it's not working. Okay, I cannot show it. Okay, so if a region is specialized in many industry functions in the middle of this network, it has many opportunities to move in related industry functions, so it can really diversify in all kinds of new global value chains and new functions in global value chain, because it is positioned in the center of this network. If you only specialize in one particular industry function, which is in the periphery of this network, you don't have many opportunities to move into different industry functions. So you cannot really move and upgrade your global value chain that easily because you lack the capabilities to do so. Yes. Third, I think advantages of this type of approach is that I can explain the ability of a region to develop a new industry function depending on the degree of related existing industry function. It's just like related diversification principle, and we can now apply it to the global value chain literature. What we also can do is now we can explain the low value added traps that has been observed by many already in the literature in the global value chain. So the opportunity set of regions is restricted to very low complex industry functions, right? You remember the Silesia region had a negative relationship. It really could not move in very complex industry functions because its opportunity set is just not there. So it is trapped in low complex global value chain and functions. We could also include the role of value chain linkages between regions, right? Because we can also actually see the flows going on from region to region, so you can incorporate it in a network. But what's also, I think, interesting is you can also explain downgrading processes in this particular network, because you can look at which kind of industry function will exit your region, yes, and do you really lose the most complex industry functions over time, which would reflect the downgrading process of your global value chains. All right, I have some empirics, but I just want to show the last slide. And thank you for your attention.
Fantastic. Now we'll move on to Henry Yeung.
And the like button. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I got it. I learned from Ron how to perform my gut. This is the first time I stand in front, not a podium, but in front of people. So I feel very naked. Okay, I shall try to, I mean, it's a hard act to follow from Ron. So I shall try to do a decent presentation. And I have titled this talk, which actually has a paper, which both of us will produce for regional studies. Eventually will come out in some forms that talks from the regional to the global, which is kind of global production network stuff, and back to the regional. You will find out why I say so. Okay, let me see what it works. First of all, just to say that actually some 6 years ago or 5.5 years ago, Karen will remember, we actually held something like this, and Danny was in the audience. If you see Danny here, and then Ron, and no, Ron is here, and that's me, and Martin Hess, and Godfrey is here, all right? So we had this debate some time ago. So it's good that we finally can do a proper one this round, whereby you will see, some activities. And of course, last year at the Global Conference on Economic Geography in Dublin, Dieter kindly organized, we had such infectious discussion in both terms, double hermeneutic, infectious, that we both get our double red line thereafter. So if you guys, sadly remember. So we had wonderful exchanges. And I just want to say that we have started engaging with each other for years now. And what I'm going to do is to say a few words about those exchanges and then focus on some of the bigger parameters about remaking the global economy, and finally push for some kind of common research agenda. Okay, so Ron has already kindly explained some of the recent exchanges that we have done, so I shall by and large skip this just to say we have started some conversation, and in that sense I'm very happy to be part of the Boschma citation network. I gained my first B index 1, all right, not Hirsch index, you need B index. B Boschma index is very important. Mine is 1, all right, not bad. So first, in our exchanges, I think we have arrived at a kind of common understanding that we need to look at regional evolution not in a dichotomous way, both internal, external, but in a dualistic, co-constitutive way, right? Regions change, but not just due to internal dynamics, nor externally impinged pressures, but both. You kind of need to look at both. Second is to say that this kind of dialectical interactions help us to understand, of course, in EEG, the important point about regional branching, and of course, from the GPN point of view, how regions coupled with global production networks. So these are some of our common understanding. Today, I want to bring you back from the global to the regional. Partly, this is a Regional Studies Association meeting. Second, you will find out later why I think now the region becomes a lot more important arena than the global, all right? Even though I work on the global stuff, right? And finally, say something about what I think will be important for this coming decade, the whole idea of regional resurgence. I mean, this is Michael is not here, stopper, but this is Michael Stopper's idea of regional resurgence. Somewhat, what was it, 50 years later, right, in the 1995 paper in Earth. So what I'm going to do is to develop some common agenda for our kind of studies. Okay, just to say that, yeah, we can work together, obviously, right? I mean, this is in front of our department, and we can also write together in that famous, dangerous Maserati that some of you sat in before. I'm afraid I don't have that car anymore, but basically, this is the incriminating photo of Ron, and oh, I run out of pictures. I was trying to show more pictures so I don't have to give a presentation, but I need my phone. But that's why I take pictures, you see. Having said that, it's good that we can start with some common ground, right? I think there is something big happening. And of course, many of us realize that something happened in the past few years that is enable us from getting together. And this is a great feeling, right? Together. So something has happened to the global economy, which will have significant impact on our life in this decade or beyond. So what I'm going to do is to say something about how we need to sort of take advantage of the current opportunities in rethinking the global economy and develop what I would like to call an integrative view of regional change. The quote is from somebody's paper in regional studies. But the whole idea is that I think the demand conditions that will shape regional change will be fundamentally reshaped. In other words, where does demand for economic activities come from? But also for the fact that the competitive dynamics we have been always taken for granted, market-based mechanism, if you like, under the broad neoliberal regime, Washington consensus, are going to be reshaped, and you will find out why. Okay, the main reason has a lot to do with politics, but there is a second aspect. So I want to focus first on geopolitics. And by the way, my paper has been written, and Ron has kindly put it as the Evolutionary Economic Geography paper of Utrecht, so you can go and download it, all right, the first draft, so to speak, all right? So it's based on a written paper. I think there are significant concerns that many of you know about. I think in the morning session in finance, of course, it was already well discussed by Daniela's Gober's paper, all right, this morning. So there are many of these policy initiatives that many of you in Europe know of, some in America know of, we in Asia are highly sensitive to, because this will fundamentally reshape the ways in which we develop industries. So industrial policy, we protect industries, yeah, reshoring, friendshoring. We deal with many of these consequences. So in that sense, I think this is a coming era that we both, GPN, EEG, and many other different perspectives will have to address. And of course, the key point is that this has happened before. I mean, in the 1980s, those of us old enough will remember that there was the strategic trade policies that the US imposed on Japan in that days, okay? The whole idea of Japan as number one. And of course, you don't often see an American president holding a wafer in front of everybody trying to showcase that, hey, we make this stuff. we need to make more of this stuff by pumping in lots of money, 52 billion Chips Act, and the Europeans also are not falling behind, right? Pumping in 43 billion EU Chips Act. And of course, we are not talking about this kind of more chips, all right? These are not edible chips, all right? And big money going to descend. This will fundamentally change the way we rethink industry, regional change, and so on. This slide, oh, never mind if it doesn't work. Yeah, so this is the slide that shows you the many national initiatives from the America to Europe to China to India to Japan to South Korea in drumming up this particular industry, just semicon alone, but there are other many industries and industrial policies that I think will follow suit. So this is just to give you some idea of the happening in the real world, which will really reshape the way in which we think about regional economies. Now, of course, some time ago, Pockerman and Ron is, okay, so David, this is David Baylor, the Nobel Prize winner, Pockerman, and this is Ron sitting there. I was next to you. Yeah? So in our 2010 RSA session at the annual meeting of the American Association of Geographers, that's 2 years after Pockerman won his Nobel Prize for contribution to economic geography. Yeah. So what Krugman did, right, when he talked about geography and trade was this, that countries don't really compete against each other, but leading firms from the national economies compete against each other. It's not country that compete, but firms compete against each other. By the way, very interesting, in this part of thing, I was in Stockholm School of Economics a month ago. I gave a full presentation on geography and trade in front of the international economists in the Hesha Olin conference, which I think is on YouTube, so you can go and check it out. Spoke with Mark Malitz from Harvard, and then I think the Deputy Director General of WTO, Annabelle Gonzalez, and then I think the former European Commissioner of Trade you know of, and that's Cecilia Malmström. Those of you from Gothenburg will know Cecilia well, as well as, of course, the former Chief Economist of World Bank, Penny Goldberg, who's an Yale economist. So we have debated on this matter, geography and trade, localization of production, bringing back production to Europe, things like that. Now, some of you might know that some of this notion of, other parts of the world are outcompeting us. It's not new, all right? In the 1980s, Intel was complaining against the Japanese, all right? Intel invented the memory chip before the microprocessor, and yet Intel lost so much money during that era to the Japanese memory chip makers, so much so that Andrew Grove, who was the first employee, the co-founder, so to speak, of Intel, former CEO, chairman of Intel, said that, hey, Intel was located in the wrong country, America. All the action happened in Japan. Today, you will see the same complaint of Intel against, in this case, South Korean, Taiwanese, and Chinese. Yeah. So the whole point I want to make to you is that a lot of the happening in today's geopoliticized world are not necessarily new, except today there is a security dimension. There is a resilient dimension, because then the complaint against Japan is number one, Japan was an ally. Japan wasn't an adversary. You see what I'm saying? So today, much of the happening, unfortunately, I will say, has become geopoliticized. However, as we are talking, the world has changed. So the 1980s world, production was a lot more national, territorialized. The entire production system tend to be located in the same country. Today, as you will find out if you bother to read my book, very, very complex interconnected flows of material, equipment, activities, human brains, so on and so forth. It's almost like the 1980s RSA meeting will be full of Brits only. Today, very international. That's the difference I'm trying to explain to you. So this is the world we live in now, but we have new challenges, which is the geopolitical infection of this. Okay, I need to get this right. One click. Yeah. The second component, meaning that even if we didn't have geopolitical context, for the sake of argument, all of us lived through the pandemic, meaning we know we have heightened risks of supply chain failures. When you run out of toilet papers, you know supply chain. All right. Before the pandemic, EEG, you don't have to explain. We have to explain what is supply chain production network, because people don't know what the hell you're talking about. But now I can just say toilet paper, masks. When you run out of it, that's called supply chain. People get it. All right, the fish seller will get it. Everybody gets it. However, if you are the region that happens to make cars, you realize that why is it our workers have to stop work? Well, because there was a shortage of chips that go into the car. So it's nothing to do with the auto industry per se, but to do with another industry because of the interconnectedness. There are some technical specificities that there was chip shortage. Actually, the chip shortage for auto chips still lasts until now because my brother-in-law works for Siemens Auto Group. So basically, you're going to find all these interconnections that will last for some time to come. So I'm using all this to just highlight the importance of many of the issues at stake in the global economy, heightened geopolitical contests, heightened risks of production failure, system blockages, and so on. The two are not the same, but they are going to be extremely important in shaping how GPN EEG works. That needs to be done. And I think Ron already mentioned the risk factor. So it's very, very important. We hopefully can build some grounds. In case you ask, what the hell do I do in the past 2 years? I was reading feminist theory and post-colonial theory. And that's the new book that is coming out with the RGS book series called Theory and Explanation in Geography. All right. So I don't do just semicon, I do feminist theory. But there is something I think we can do together. The whole idea of epistemology is that we can make our work more explanatory. You know, intellectuals, we have lost some of our shines, right? You know, after Donald Trump, people don't believe in academics, intellectuals, partly because maybe we say things that are too over the top. They can't really understand what the hell we're talking about. So, okay, can I ask you to think in terms of epistemology that can we make our work more explanatory? If you like, I would love it to be even more causal explanatory. That's what I'm trying to argue for in terms of the work that we do together. EEG, GPN work, we can make our work more causal, more explanatory without overgeneralizing about everything, you know, in one theory, that kind of stuff. Of course, in economic geography, we have big debates about explanations at the AAG session a few weeks ago. And hopefully we can pursue this idea. Now, in the remaining 5 minutes, I shall just outline the 4 research agendas which I put up in the paper. Very briefly. First, network and regional resilience. I think, you know, we are regional study people, so we are very familiar with the troubles of regional resilience. We experience problems. So hopefully in future studies, we're able to combine the insights of EEG and GPN to help us to understand network dynamics and resilience, how to build resilience, how to sustain, and so on and so forth. The second agenda is to bring institutions and the state back into our analysis. And you have thought, oh, this is what GPN people do. No, this is what Ron teaches you. This is the geographical wisdom that Ron has told you you should look into. All right. So Ron, in his 2022 ADP paper, specifically, I'll remind us, all right, the lack of geographical vision in some studies. For example, diversification in China is likely to be very different from diversification in Latin America because of very different set of institutions, of course, understandable. National and regional institutions and varieties of capitalism need to be brought into, in this case, EEG, and of course, understanding of global production network. So I urge you to bring institutions and state back into action. And geopolitics will have necessitated that kind of approach. Third is that inequalities and uneven development remain our dependent variable, if you like, because that's really what we want to do. Why? How? There are significant inequalities, which hopefully are not worsening, but maybe, and so on and so forth. So the kind of geopolitical intervention seems to favor certain regions more than others. So we may see heightened inequalities, and how do we research on them? Provide policy suggestions to reduce some of those inequalities will remain extremely important. I think in the paper, I've outlined one idea, is that perhaps due to these geopolitical challenges and risk factors, that we may not follow the usual evolutionary path dependency kind of development. There may be path breaking. I mean, we have quite a few of you, the agency, institution path development colleagues here. So we may experience revolutionary path development. So bear in mind, exciting things may happen. And well, skip this one. And finally, just to say that regional resurgence, I think, that's why I put the paper, right, from the regional to the global and back to the regional. because I think this decade is going to be the decade of the regional. It's the region that will stay the most important policy unit and attention of all of us. So I urge you strongly to, build, if you like, the complexity of the kind of regional complexity concept that, again, earlier Ron has explained to you, plus also perhaps some of the ideas in GPN studies. Hopefully, we can do a better job in another 5-6 years' time. It's not Ron and I talk, but some of you who will then show us the new and exciting stuff that you do. And on that, thank you very much.
Wonderful stuff and admirably prompt as well. So thank you for that. So I'm now handing over to Professor Jessie Poon.
Hello. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to the speakers for a very lively or two very lively presentations. I think both speakers have covered a lot of ground, but I'm just going to pick up on 4 points. 3 of them raised by Henry. The first is epistemic, regarding the need to ground explanations in causal mechanisms. The second, geopolitical and GPN risk in sort of influencing the resurgence of regions in the future, or at least as a scale of interest. The third being a dialectical approach towards the combination of GPN and EEG, which I find quite exciting in terms of thinking about it, because I've been thinking about it for some time. And the fourth point by Ron on regional, actually industrial upgrading, and he, I'm glad to say, I think on his slide, he said yes, maybe to regional capability rather than to dismiss it completely, largely because my point of entry today is through this idea of bringing the dialectical approach together through a firm and regional capability perspective. So both EEG and GPN have identified capability as in various degrees as a causal factor in regional development. A key tenet of regional capability, of course, many of you know here, is the variety of routines among firms and the ease of social learning and knowledge transfer arising from industry or technological relatedness. Now, so for Ron, or the whole EEG field, the firm stocks of routines and knowledge shape a region's capability. Now, firm capability is also important in GPN 2.0. In fact, one of the causal factors that was identified by Henry and co. Is capability cost ratio. And I think Ron himself today pointed to cost as well as one of the factors affecting capability. So that's good to see. What I think are clearly the differences between the two are the sources of inspiration. One coming from evolutionary economics and the other one from the international business perspective. Now, because EEG adopts or adapts at least the Schumpeterian view that regional transformation process comes from within, the source of change therefore lies in routines, their selection and reproduction that generate the evolutionary dynamics for firms to adapt to regional environments. And of course, he also brought in this whole thing about cognitive proximity, and that's related to geographical proximity because of the way tacit knowledge transfers, and there's a lot of friction in terms of the transfer of knowledge. But because of the way these endogenous forces work, the scale of interest is, of course, the region. So the way, for instance, search ensues, and search is fairly local. To me, this is a kind of region that is somewhat different from Henry's view of the region in terms of geopolitical and techno-nationalism factors that led to its resurgence, namely from the retreat of globalization. Let me say that the regional turn, both in the US and UK, is also motivated by the need to address climate change and left behind regions. So Bidenomics includes priority on green investments, particularly renewable energy like electrical vehicles. I mean, they are very important to his plan. And I'm kind of have a lot of conversations with the officials there because I'm involved in the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation meetings that are being held right now in the United States. The US, for instance, possesses no nickel, and lithium battery needs nickel. So from that perspective, supply resilience is very important to the Biden administration, and it may come across as techno-nationalism, but I also think that it's more than techno-nationalism. The Science and Chip Act, for instance, that everybody is so fascinated about, probably looks at the rivalry between the United States and China, but the plan that is being identified for 20 techno hubs in the United States, none of them is in California. None of them is a and California is, of course, a super hub of technology in the United States. In fact, all of the 20 tech hubs are outside of California. Some of them in the Midwest where I live, actually in distressed areas. So basically, it's also to address regionally distressed areas. Where I think there are kind of common grounds for, and especially for how GPN can enter the conversation in terms of EEG, is this term called dynamic capability that was introduced by David Tees. Now, David Tees from Stanford University says that the kinds of routines that you find in EEG literature are what he calls low-order routines, or at best you can get ordinary regional capability. If you want dynamic capability that involves novel or revolutionary technology, then it comes from entrepreneurs. So you got to look at entrepreneurs and CEOs, for example, and that's where GPN comes in, because GPN's assumption is that global lead firms, managers, for instance, and their entrepreneurs, strategic actions and strategic decisions matter. Okay, so to take an example, and I'm glad that Ron's slide had Mr. Stancher on him, the smiley girl. Okay, so when I was flying here from the United States, I watched a interview by Mr. Stancher, and he is, of course, the founder as well as the previous CEO and chairman of Acer Company, and that's like the biggest electronics company in Taiwan. But also, so I want to sort of look at the dialectics here. Simply because when he first started out in the 1980s, he will tell you that he went around looking for markets, and political leaders told him Taiwan would never be a computer cluster. It's just geopolitically too close to China, so that would never happen. Okay, and he said, well, we started off with low, thin, ordinary routines, as it were. So we went into OEM, which is original equipment manufacturing. But Stancher decided that was not good enough, and he was going to turn the industry around, and that was Hsinchu Park, which is a techno park of Taiwan, by moving into higher order routines, dynamic capability. So that was the industrial upgrading. So he went into original design manufacturing. In fact, his quote I watched on the interview was brand first, subcontracting later. So that was how he approached the whole thing. So this is a kind of GPN EEG dialectic that I see might be possible regarding how you sort of combine exogenous and endogenous perspectives. Nonetheless, firm capability remains under-theorized in GPN 2.0. It is difficult to assess the relative effect of geopolitical versus GPN risk in regional development through the interaction with capability. So let's take the China-US rivalry, which has preoccupied a lot of people. In my view, looking at the data, semicon exports just between the two countries have indeed gone down, but actually it went down long ago, like 7 years ago, well before the Trump era and the CHIP Act. Okay. However, chips, on the other hand, the exports from China to US and US to China have gone up. So over the last 7 years, they have not fallen at all. So what is interesting is, I think it brings home the point that what the Biden administration is targeting revolutionary technology, not evolutionary technology. And so in that sense, what you have here is that I think part of the reason why China is still exporting a lot of chips to the US is because it's dominated by technology that is still relatively low range or evolutionary, as it were. So a lot of these chips are still exporting to the US. And of course, China is a big producer of chips, and that's the other reason. So I think let me also just bring in this whole worry about technological decoupling that has been featured prominently in the press. I want to quote the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who says, "We are for de-risking and diversifying, not decoupling." Now, I have worked with some of these officials, and they struggled to come up with a language to try and see how you actually don't want to decouple. How do you de-risk? So here is the interesting thing. The techno types of acts that are recent, like the CHIP Act, may be traced back to the 1949 Export Control Act in the US that targeted Soviet Union then. Then there was this Cold War between US and Soviet Union. And at that time, during this act, you had the Department of Defense actually financing the electronics industry in the Silicon Valley. In fact, the Silicon Valley's rise, so to bring in the revolutionary part, is really due to, I know he's chasing me. So it's really due to exclusive military access to military procurement networks. So the de-risking actually was paralleled by the rise of the Silicon Valley. So it's not necessarily a bad thing in that sense, because it could prompt new ways of thinking about things. So I do want to just put out a point on related variety because the Department of Defense needed a fuse at that time for its atomic bomb. And so the Silicon Valley came up with that fuse, and then the electronics industry just grew up around that invention. So this is part of what I'm talking about. The de-risking may look threatening, but it actually could be also a way for new path formation. So I want to conclude with the some reservations, in some things I'm talking about. I think the good news is all of us recognize regional variety, developing regions, advanced regions, and how do you put the two together? And so some of the themes together about how do we tackle regional variety. But one of the reservations I have, and this is my concluding remark, is methodological. One is actor-centric. The other one conducts work at the population level. So reconciling the two would be a great way to think about how to move forward as well. So thank you.
Wonderful. And we'll now hand over to Professor Lisa de Propris.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me today, even if remotely. So I do agree with Jessie, with Henry, and with Ron that there is an overlap between the evolutionary economic geography literature and the GPN. In particular, this overlap is in the tension between the global and the local. And why is there a tension? I think both of them look at the same things, but they have different interests. The tension between the local and the global really became very evident, especially if we look at the literature on GPNs, but also if we look at the impact of globalization on regions. Became very evident with and this is my first point, with the 2008 financial crisis. Because what we saw then is that if until then globalization and all the literature on international business, GPN, but also the GVC, they basically stressed what were multinational corporations doing in terms of pursuing their own interests, and therefore bringing that wealth back to the home economy. Now, this, of course, had impacts at the regional level in terms of creating what I would call like black and white patchwork of economic prosperity. So we know now that the globalization of the 1990s and 80s was very much a process which created winners and losers. Now, this patchwork has been the legacy of the globalization period of the 1990s, and that's how we somehow entered the 2020s. The national, and why was this detachment? I would argue that we've been talking about global and local, but to some extent, the very important dimension that I would introduce in the conversation is the national, because the reason why we have the inequality and the polarization that occurred post-globalization was because the national level was really pursuing, neoliberalist free market policies, and at the regional level, we economic geographers were looking at cluster policy, innovation policy, regional innovation policy. In a sense, we were looking at the local level, but the national level was somehow doing exactly the opposite, from supporting rather than supporting the regional economies. So what we see is that from 2008, this complete shift away from understanding globalization as a wonderful thing. So really, we have a huge debate on rebalancing national economies, on deglobalization and reshoring. And I know this seems to be now quite old concepts, but in reality, they started a rethinking about the value of the region and the resilience of regions, because we came to understand that the only way for regions to grow is not just for themselves to be on a path to growth, but also what happens around these regions. If these regions are in areas where nothing is happening, can actually regional development sustain? Can it be sustained when is, in a sense, contrasted by really maybe neighboring regions which are in decline? And so what we see is that to some extent, we got into the 2015-10, kind of at the end of a long period of pain due to the financial crisis, and we start talking about technological change. I started working on the fourth industrial revolution, on 4.0 technologies. I think this is a watershed moment. The reason being, these technologies are the beginning and the end of a lot of decisions that policy has to worry about at the moment. What do I mean? I mean that regions, there are already studies out there, for example, in the special issue in 2001, arguing already that there is polarization of regional performance, and this polarization will be worsened by technological change. So regions which are already performing well in terms of 3.0 technologies will also perform well in 4.0 technologies. So the path dependencies, which is very much within the evolutionary economic geography, is confirming diverging pathways for regions. Now, the argument is, what can you do about that? And I think doing nothing is no longer an option. So the strategy to just let the best win is not really going to work, because the lesson of 2008 has been that there is an awareness now that there are the losers of globalization and there are the losers of technological change. And in reality, a kind of a prosper thy neighbor approach, if you forgive me the line, is no longer politically sustainable. So I agree with Henry. There are geopolitical issues at stake here, but they are the consequence of a fear that we are in the middle of a technological race. Why? Because the technologies which are emerging, which are very much part of the green and digital transition, they will be the foundation of our economy and society in the next 10, 20, 50 years. Now, this means that owning these technologies, developing these technologies, anchoring these technologies is fundamentally important. I appreciate that this has meant a change of pace in the national policy in Europe and in the US. we see now what I would argue being nested, so policies which are designed at the national level but have a very strong place-based approach. Even if we take, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, we see that the money is allocated on the basis of very spatial criteria. So there is a spatial awareness which has been absent in American, certainly industrial policy now. It has already been present in European policy, but we see more and more a kind of a joining at the hip of regional and national policy. And the reason is that regional policy cannot, in my view, has limitations because the technologies we're trying to develop have a scale effect, they're combinatorial, they are transformative, and they are exploratory. This means that regions will be always constrained by their own capabilities. So we are entering a phase of translocal innovation policy, translocal technological policies. And this means that to have these type of policies, which are transformative for regions, there must be some kind of national level coordination. So if we're looking, for example, at the American, recent political commitment towards building a technological capability in the US at the expense of other countries, I accept that. And the same for the European Union with the European Green Deal, but also the digital agenda. For example, remember the digital agenda was actually launched in 2010. So these ideas are, maybe some things have now come to the fore, but they have been brewing for a while. The idea that there are these technologies in the background, they need to be developed and owned, I think is something that has been in the mind of policymakers. Now, the change in terms of policy gear is that if there is this realignment between regional and national policy, as we see in the whole literature on the mission-oriented policies. This is very clear, the grand challenges. All this literature is trying to link together places with the different scale of economic activities and different scale of technological capabilities. Certainly the world is not very much used to having Western economies with long-term, inclusive, interventionist industrial and innovation policies. And I would argue that it is true that this is something that kind of clashes with what has been until now a more free market and liberal approach. But certainly the only way regions can survive, gain resilience, but also seize the challenge of technological change is if they are working together through translocal policies and translocal networks, whereby they can bypass, overcome their limitations. Thank you.
Wonderful. That was brilliant. So I'm going to ask, that's wonderful and spot on time. So I'm going to ask the panelists to come to the table. And if we could, starting off with Ron and then moving on to Henry, just get some very brief reflections or responses on what's just been said, please.
All right, thanks for the very good, insightful comments. A few comments to Jessie. I think it was a wonderful intervention. I think what you were addressing is right that we should also focus a bit more on new path formation, right, and also break path dependency now and then. I agree with that, but I think also that we have to be a bit cautious and to see, first of all, if there are also opportunities which would represent more low-hanging fruits, right, which can also move your economy into different directions. And that can be explored and can be studied. Of course, unrelated diversification, as we refer to it, right? So is something necessary in certain circumstances, right? The one that I showed is the low complexity trap, right? That Silesia, for example, is currently grounded in. And that means that you, for me, it's more kind of a policy question, right? Because the type of opportunity sets that you have require different types of policies. Right, and if you have this low complexity trap, it means a completely different type of policy than if you would have relevant capabilities to build on and just make some improvements. Second point I think that I would like to comment on is the resilience notion that has been mentioned by a number of speakers. I think yes, and especially the geopolitical risk that we are confronted with, right? So now tensions between the US and China, and you had this bloody ship that blocked the Suez Canal not that long ago, right? Which has major consequences for supply chains. In a way, this what I like about also the approach that I presented is a network approach, right? So you can really study resilience and see to what extent nodes become inaccessible and to what extent that will change the whole network, and some supply lines might be more affected than others. But also at the same time, it might also change the opportunity sets of regions, right, to actually participate in global value chains. So in that sense, I think you can make that visible. And another thing that I would like to address is then you in evolutionary term, you would mean you get a new selection environment, right? So regions and lead firms and multinational corporations have to reposition themselves. They have to adapt, right, to new circumstances, and I think an evolution approach can actually be very fruitful in that respect. Then maybe you should not talk too long. Yes, I see you. Just maybe one comment of Lisa stressing the role of that we have to go a bit beyond regional capabilities, right, in a way, and to look more into interconnectivity and try to stimulate that by policy. Well, I'm very much involved in smart specialization policy in the European Union. And the thing is that people tend to connect smart specialization policy with capturing capabilities that are present in the region. But already from the very beginning, the smart specialization policy had also guidelines that the regions should really exploit complementarities elsewhere in Europe, because that is what whole Europe is about. And we just did a study for the Pettermans thing, and there's a report over here that is on one of the desks, in which we showed that those complementarities are not being exploited across Europe. It means there is a lot of unexploited potential in interregional linkages, and this is exactly the point. Well, then indeed, as Lisa said, then you really have to have a nice policy mix on a national dimension. Well, okay, that's too much. Okay, I stop here.
Okay, I shall be brief in addressing, I think, Jessie's last point about methodology, and then Lisa's point about technology. Okay, let me start with Jessie's point about if kind of characterizing GPN studies as more actor-centric, and then EEG as being more, if you like, population level, ecological level studies. Okay, so I shall respond from a sort of GPN perspective by reiterating the fact that despite the focus on actors, we actually focus on actors in relations. So ironically, the idea of a relational view in GPN, GVC studies is actually very close to, of course, EEG's interests in related variety, related interactive economic activities. So I think a common ground we can establish in methodological terms is, if you like, always look out for relations. I mean, I'm all for relational. I mean, we've done this 20 years ago, relational economic geography, the relational turn. So I think the idea of a network is, of course, by definition, relational. So goes to evolutionary path, evolution, and so on. Also, by definition, is relational in nature. So I hope the idea of emphasis on relations will help kind of deal with this maybe perhaps perceived notion of too much on actors or too much on population. Then on Lisa's point on technology, I completely agree that technologies are going to shape, of course, the future for all of us. As we experience, I mean, 3 years ago, if you knew the existence of Zoom, you wouldn't be sitting here. You'd be multi-billionaire, right? So I never knew about Zoom until, we had to use it. So the whole point is technologies fundamentally reshape our life. Completely agree. But as I alluded in one of the slides, I want you to also think about the demand and market conditions for those technologies and technological changes. I mean, technologies change, but for what? Surely, the funders of technology R&D will want something, if you like, concrete, right? Something that really can be sellable. If you're the investors, you want your rate of return, right? So the whole idea of, and by the way, one of the whole reason why America is losing chip production was that because venture capital in Silicon Valley and Wall Street investors didn't want to invest in American firms that have wafer fabrication because it takes too long to earn the money. Yeah, it takes 3 to 5 years. So the idea of demand condition, market changes, you need to pay great attention to it. It's a very simple illustration. Since about 5 years ago, the world of electronics, the biggest demand comes from Asia. Europe and America no longer the biggest customer for smartphones, for PCs, and for TVs, because we in Asia had nothing better to do except browsing our phones and, I'm kidding, and so on. So pass on.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So if we could now take questions, I'll take a round of questions for all 4 of our presenters, if that's okay. So who's got questions? I know there's one. There should be some roving microphones as well. You put your confident hands up if you've got a question. Yeah, okay, we'll go with Robert, Emil, and then Martin. So,
yes, thanks a lot. My name is Robert Hassing, Kiel University, Germany. Very interesting discussion and presentations. I've got 2 questions. One is I noticed that you used GVC and GPN interchangeably. Ron talked about GVC, others about GPN. I learned in the economic geography textbooks that there are clear differences between the two, particularly in the books written by you, Henry, and by Peter Dick and so on, stressing particularly the non-firm actors as a key actor in these globalization processes. So I was wondering why you use the 2 terms interchangeably. I think there's a clear difference. And I would argue that in current times, GPN are even more important because of the role of the national state as a key actor, increasingly important actor. Another question is concerning regional resurgence you mentioned, referring to Stolper and Scott in the 1990s. What is different now than then? How do you define the region? Is that just a subnational level or also several countries grouping together? That's also something I would like to know.
I said we'd take 3 questions, not from the same person, Robert. And if we go to, I think Emil had a question as well.
Yes, thank you. Emil Evenhuis, Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency. Yeah, so what I was missing a bit is a concern with the environment, basically, and with the ambitions and the need to move to a more sustainable economy. And shouldn't that also be part and parcel of the exchange and the between EEG and GPN, and also sort of the agenda of both these strands of literature?
Fantastic. Well, let's just start with those 3 questions. So, one about the sort of differences between the, or lack of them between the sort of thing, about the regional definition and the environment. If I start off with Lisa, do you feel okay taking one of those? And then I'll go Jessie, Henry, and then Ron.
Yes, probably more comfortable with the last one on climate change. Probably, yeah.
Go for it.
Do you want me to start?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I think you're right, and this is why, in a sense, in my presentation, I really try to put technologies at the center, because I think climate change and digital technologies and digital change transition are absolutely crucial to whatever we're doing. So I agree with Jessie, Ron, and Henry about really most of the things they've said. I just think all the effort has to be at the moment. Like, for what? What would we really need to do to change the way our economies is working, our society is working? So I think, to be honest, it's not that we haven't mentioned, because I'm sure Ron and Henry and Jessie feel the same. I think it's just an underlying concern, but it is so complex that either you talk about it in a lecture just itself, it's quite hard to just touch on it without being specific. The only thing I would add, though, is that environmental concerns have a scale effect. You can't have a region, a city trying to do something. You need a critical mass of change to really tip things over. And this is why this intersection between local, regional, national, and global is crucial, probably more for environmental concerns than any of the other transitions we will experience. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Jessie, can I call on you next?
I think I'll respond to the question on GVC versus GPN, because there's certainly a lot of economic geographers in the United States who use the GVC perspective rather than the GPN perspective, right? And I think part of that, why maybe Ron uses GVC rather than GPN is largely because he's interested in upgrading. So it's much easier to look at sort of sections of the value chain when you're thinking of upgrading. Whereas I think the GPN perspective is much more about how do you provide a mechanism for, as it were, knowledge transfer or knowledge upgrading, and networks in that sense, provide that mechanism. So here we are sort of thinking of, one is a mechanism of transfer of knowledge. The other one is largely these segments of value chain where you can actually upgrade. So that this is how I see the debate going in the United States, at least, and those who do not want to use GPN. Okay, yeah.
Henry?
Okay, I start with Robert's two questions first. GPN, GVC, just to clarify, GPN tends to be the term that we use in the field of economic geography and to a certain extent, regional studies. So GPN, because of the origin of the very framework, tends to be very much to do with the discipline itself. But GVC is much broader. And the two communities are very close. I mean, we go to SASI, Society of Advancement in Economics conference together, Gary Giraffe and whole gang, we work closely together. I'm involved in the Global Value Chain Development Report 2023 as the lead author of the chapter on semiconductors. So we work together. But of course, along the way, when I talk to the economists, the development sociologists, and so on, I will emphasize the importance of not going linear, because the idea of chain is too linear. But for today's purpose, because we have many non-specialists, we just take it interchangeably. But if it's in a very GPN or GVC specific workshop, we will differentiate in greater detail. Second point to Robert's question about regional resurgence, particularly Stopper 1995 in European Urban and Regional Studies. But if you recall that very paper, right, Stopper was talking about untraded interdependencies. What that meant was very much about, if you like, localized agglomeration effects. So and of course, it's closer to EEG work. But as you can tell, when I talk about regional resurgence, I do not mean about, if you like, economies within the region, but very much perhaps even new propulsive regions that come into existence because of all this geopolitical shift, if you like, regions that gain semiconductor manufacturing. Finally, to Lisa, was it Lisa's point about the environment? It goes like this. Okay, very briefly, I'm economic geographer. I did economic geography and I did environment planning A for 23 years. I can tell you we would love to have more papers on the environment. All right, in economic geography, environmental economic geography is weak. We love to see more work done on the environment. Now, Richard Florida used to write about greening industries in the 1990s. Before he went into, of course, the creative class stuff. If you don't believe, Google Richard Florida, all right? So the point I'm trying to make to you is that despite the fact that Richard started so early talking about greening industries, we never follow up in economic geography. Richard Florida was an economic geographer, yeah. So the point I want to make to all of our friends here is that I would love to see more work done on the environment, but it's difficult. Give you an empirical example. Taiwan, TSMC, a very famous company, consumes 10% of Taiwan's water, 10% of Taiwan's electricity. Singapore, we make as many wafers as all of the fabs in Europe add up together. But because of that, we have to drink our urine in Singapore because we have to create new water by cleaning the water and use it. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the very industry I study is very environmentally demanding, damaging, however you call it, semiconductors. You better don't want semiconductors. You have to drink your urine, all right? So the point is that the environment is extremely important, not just about CO2 decarbonization, but about existing, if you like, the existing activities that are environmentally challenging. And we should do more to find out more. There are, by the way, some colleagues who study these aspects as well. So hopefully, Lisa, we can respond to some of the environmental challenges. Yeah, to Ron.
Yeah, not much to add. I agree with the distinction between GPN and GVCs, and indeed in my area development policy, I distinguish between four, not indeed to make that type of confusion about bringing together different literatures and make the same type of argument. Yes, about the green transition, I think now people are really jumping on the topic, right? So, but there's a lot of work to be done. What we're doing from an evolution perspective, we look at green transitions, but of course also the work by Lars and others on sustainability transitions, right? I think it's a perfect example of moving into that direction. Taking a more broader perspective, right? Also, for non-firms, et cetera, also talking about regimes and niches and those type of things. And to be honest, that is also quite an evolutionary literature. Those concepts, at least, that were proposed by evolution economics. So yes, there's a lot to be done, but I think also on inequalities, right? Which is I mean, we now all tend to refer to all kinds of global societal challenges, and we try to incorporate that in our framework. It's not always that easy to do, but it's definitely on the research agenda. And you're absolutely right. We should do much more on that in that respect, and see to what extent indeed we can mean something to each other. Also here to tackle these type of societal challenges in our research frameworks. Okay.
That's wonderful. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to make a couple of quick points to conclude. First of all, so Dimitri Koubakis has left a question online, which I think the sort of point of which is very clear, which is to what extent can we actually expect local and regional governments to influence global value chains? To what extent do they have anything they can sort of do that? And I just want to leave it by just summing up for me the two sort of killer lines I've heard today. So first was Lisa used the phrase translocal innovation policy. I'm not 100% sure what that is, but I'm definitely going to write a paper on it because it sounds like the next big thing. And then Jessie, who set up today's event and been brilliant doing that. Thank you for that. She used the phrase. She used the sort of killer phrase about evolutionary economic geography, that it was revolutionary. The CHIPS Act was focused on revolutionary, not evolutionary technology, which I thought was a wonderful line. Look, thank you so much for attending. I'm sorry we have a hard stop at 1:45, but I'm afraid I think our people will be still hanging around outside if you want any more questions with them. Thank you so much to everyone who's been here, and thank you to our wonderful speakers.